Now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Diya Dutta, consultant and development researcher, to present a paper on gender transformative social protection and the addressing of unpaid care and domestic work via social protection. Now, she holds a PhD in sociology from the Jawaharlal Nehru University and a master's in philosophy in development studies from Oxford University. She was awarded the prestigious Commonwealth Scholarship and Fellowship Plan to read for the Oxford degree. Dr. Dutta has been engaged in the development sector research for 18 years and has conducted numerous field primary studies and desk research studies. So, ladies and gentlemen, over to Dr. Diya Dutta.
Thank you, Jiggy, and I thank Oxfam for inviting me to make this presentation. A very warm welcome to everybody. Let me start my presentation. So according to the International Labour Organization, social protection is an important policy instrument to protect populations from economic and social shocks which are a result of loss of income due to reasons related to sickness, maternity, employment, injury, unemployment, invalidity, old age, and death of the breadwinner. It also includes provision for universal health care and provision for benefits for family and children. Social protection assumes tremendous importance in the Southeast Asian context since a vast majority of the population, nearly 70%, are in the informal economy with no decent job, which includes no job security, fair wages, or social protection provisions. Of these, nearly 80% of women in Southeast Asia work in precarious jobs such as domestic work, unpaid work, and agricultural work. These types of employment are most likely to be associated with poverty, precarious working conditions, and the lack of labor and social protection. Oxfam refers to social protection as a human right, but is not just limited to that. It is considered a powerful tool for governments to reduce inequality, vulnerability, poverty, and essential pillar of redistributive justice. It is based on rights and principles of universality, solidarity, and gender equity, and it can be either formal or informal. Formal social protection consists of all policies and public programs that transfer resources, mainly financial resources, but sometimes in kind as well, to individuals or households with the aim of reducing and preventing poverty and vulnerability throughout the life cycle and during unexpected shocks, ensuring income security. Oxfam's approach to social protection is broader than the popular idea of social protection. It promotes a model of social protection that tackles risks and vulnerability in society as a whole, and it is the government's responsibility to ensure this right throughout the life cycle and for all. At its minimum, social protection should provide access to public health services for all and basic income security for the unemployed, all children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities, or those who are otherwise unable to earn a decent living. Oxfam advocates for social protection as a transformative tool to build just, inclusive, and thriving societies. To realize this potential, there are 5 guiding principles that it follows. First is a rights-based approach to social protection, which enshrines universal human rights and national laws. This enables rights holders to hold duty bearers to account and to be heard in policy development and delivery. Second is universal social protection, by which means all people should be adequately covered in all contingencies over the course of their life cycle. Given that this is a high aspiration, providing a social protection floor, including essential health provision and income security throughout the life cycle, is a good start. Third is focusing on solidarity and not charity. This implies a system of redistribution and risk pooling in which everyone contributes and benefits according to their means and needs, respectively. Solidarity means that even those who cannot afford to pay can still receive the services and support they need. Fourth is gender transformative social protection, which takes into account the specific needs of women and girls and guarantees independent and equal access to social protection benefits and services. It also promotes change in deeply rooted gender-power relations. When designing social protection policy, gender risks and vulnerabilities arising from structural inequalities need to be identified, recognized, and addressed. And finally, consistency with other policies. To be effective, social protection programming must work with public policies for health and education. It also has a close relationship with taxation, the economy, and the labor markets, housing, transport, and environmental sustainability. Also, social protection systems should ultimately adhere to these 5 principles in their design, governance, and implementation. Only then we will ensure the individual realization of the right to social protection and contribute to more equal and cohesive societies. So what is ASEAN's commitment to social protection? ASEAN's commitment to social protection stems from the adoption of the Declaration on Strengthening Social Protection by the ASEAN member states in October 2013 at the 23rd ASEAN Summit in Brunei, Dar es Salaam. This declaration confirmed the growing regional importance of social protection. The declaration is grounded on the principle that everyone is entitled to have equitable access to social protection that is a basic human right and based on a rights-based or needs-based life cycle approach and covering essential services as needed. In this table, it shows that the lowest social protection coverage in terms of population is registered by Cambodia at 6.2%, followed by Myanmar at 6.3% and Laos PDR at 12.1%. Singapore, where the economy is mainly in the formal sector, registered 100% coverage. The table also shows that 5 of the 10 ASEAN member states cover children with social protection schemes. These are Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand. All member states cover part of their population for work injury, disability, old age, and contributions to pension and vulnerability. 4 cover part of their population for unemployment, namely to Laos PDR, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, and none cover specific care-related social protection such as voluntary contribution to pension schemes and subsidized pension schemes. While nearly all ASEAN countries have maternity leave benefits, none, unfortunately, have equal and paid parental leave provisions at the moment. So what is the link between social protection and unpaid care and domestic work? Unequal UCDW adversely affects the quality of lives of those who perform this work, majority of whom are women, and restricts their ability to participate in the paid workforce. It is worth noting that women who bear UCDW responsibilities are often income and time poor, and therefore need paid employment. The disproportionate amount of unpaid care in domestic work impacts the number of hours spent in paid work, resulting in a motherhood employment penalty. In 2018, globally, mothers of children aged 0 to 5 years accounted for lowest employment rates at 47.6%, compared with the fatherhood employment premium, where fathers of young children report the highest employment to population ratios. Social protection can provide income support and help buffer income shocks from loss of employment for poor women. Being income and time poor means that young women and girls who are performing unpaid care and domestic work have less opportunity to pursue education and acquire skills required to enter the workforce. As a result, they are usually concentrated in low-skilled jobs in the informal economy with low wages or income and without job security and social protection. In the most developed economies in ASEAN, social protection measures include contributory schemes, which are confined to the formal economy and are not available in the informal economy, where most jobs are taken up by women. The concentration of women in informal work means that they are not able to avail care-related social protection measures such as childcare, maternity or parental leave, and non-contributory pension schemes, among others. Now I'm going to share with you some statistics about unpaid care and domestic work in ASEAN. Unpaid care and domestic work responsibilities in Southeast Asia are high and unequally distributed to women and girls. In Asia, women and girls put in 4.1 times more unpaid care and domestic work than men, and this is second highest in the world. Married women on average spend 3.5 hours per day more than men on unpaid care work. Female labor force participation, according to the UNSCAP, is a positive and statistically significant contributor to inclusive growth. A 1 percentage point increase in female labor force participation can approximately raise GDP per capita growth by 0.2 percentage point and the equity growth by 0.7 percentage point in ASEAN. So how does social protection address unpaid care work and domestic work? Social protection plays an important role in the recognition and the reduction of care work as valuable contribution to society and the vital role that women play in providing these care services. It also plays a critical role in the redistribution of care responsibilities among the household, the community, and the state. How to make social protection gender transformative. In order to make social protection policies gender transformative to address unpaid care and domestic work issues in the ASEAN region, governments in Southeast Asia must follow the 4Rs principle of recognize, reduce, redistribute, and represent paid and unpaid care workers in the programs and measures. This includes, first and foremost, governments in ASEAN should recognize the high and unequal distribution of unpaid care and domestic responsibilities that women bear. We've already discussed about how the situation in the ASEAN region is particularly poignant in this relation to this issue, because nearly 80% of the women engaged in paid labor is in the informal economy in precarious and vulnerable forms of jobs, such as domestic work, agricultural work, etc. Women working in the informal economy earn much less than those in the formal economy. And there is also a gender wage gap. They have no job security and access to contributory social protection measures in the countries among ASEAN region. It is therefore imperative to develop adaptive and anticipatory social protection programs which cover workers, especially women, in the informal economy, and instead of simply trying to alleviate their challenges, adopt a more positive attitude of promoting paid work among women where they are free from the drudgery of high responsibilities of unpaid care and domestic work. Such frameworks of adaptive and anticipatory social protection helps to recognize the important role that women in Southeast Asian countries play in the performing of crucial tasks of unpaid care and domestic work. Next is to reduce and redistribute. Second, social protection programs need to reduce and redistribute the high and unequal responsibilities of unpaid care and domestic work from women in Southeast Asian countries. This can be done through promoting paid equal parental leave, which emphasizes equal responsibility between the mother and father for childcare, long-term old age care schemes and insurances, and provide state-funded subsidized non-contributory pension schemes which will address the challenges that women in the formal economy with limited paid employment opportunities face. This will help redistribute the unpaid care and domestic responsibilities between individuals, communities, and the state. Finally, represent. Third, countries in the ASEAN region should allow for unionization of workers to effectively represent their demands for care work, support to the state and employers. This will allow for adequate representation of care workers and allow political participation or empowerment of women. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how do ASEAN countries currently address unpaid care and domestic work through their existing social protection policies. Overall, it is still very modest. On maternity, paternity, and parental leave, Vietnam is the only country in the ASEAN providing a social insurance funded maternity cash benefit equivalent to previous earnings and for at least 18 weeks. The ASEAN countries have also introduced paternity leaves, which can be lauded as a necessary step towards recognizing the caregiving responsibilities of fathers. However, most of the countries don't recognize single fathers as eligible for the benefits. And as mentioned before, none of the countries offer paid equal parental leave at the moment. On child and family benefits, Indonesia and Philippines have established conditional cash transfer programs targeting families with children. Thailand combines a child allowance as part of a social insurance with the more recently introduced child support grant, a non-contributory means-tested monetary transfer to families with children up to 3 years of age. In Lao PDR or Cambodia, cash benefits for families with children are still limited to small-scale pilots, despite their positive developmental impacts. Next, I will talk about how to establish a gender transformative social protection agenda in the ASEAN. A shift towards gender transformative social protection entails assessing who benefits at the household level and how these benefits address practical and strategic needs of women and girls. It also requires us to analyze the structures of inequality that influence the different risks and opportunities experienced by women and men at different points in their life cycle. A gender analysis is key to understanding how women and men's socially constructed roles influence their exposure to different risks, their ability to respond to these risks, and consequently, how do they benefit or do not benefit from social protection. The broadening of social protection agenda towards transformative and redistributive goals translates as a shift away from short-term solutions towards long-term approaches that tackle structural barriers underpinning poverty, inequality, and other vulnerabilities that women face. This acknowledges that an emphasis on equality and rights, in addition to economic protection, is required to empower women. Rather than increasing consumption and the basic welfare outcomes of the poorest, gender transformative social protection tackles the dynamics of marginalization and exclusion that create gender power imbalances in the first place. Gender transformative social protection employs strategies for social empowerment, address issues of social exclusion and equity from the beginning by introducing interventions focused on collective action and enhancing the agency of women. Finally, let me discuss about the recommendations that Oxfam is putting forward towards ensuring a gender transformative social protection policies. The first of the recommendations is about addressing labor rights. So among that, governments must ensure the prohibition of discrimination on the basis of maternity, family, and care responsibilities, and the right to equal pay for equal work that also covers part-time, atypical, and informal workers. Second, the social security for all workers should be ensured in labor rights that will also cover informal, domestic, and community care workers. Third, ensure that social protection systems do not create a significant inequalities between those who have an interrupted participation in the labor market due to parenthood, care work, and disabilities, and those who do not. At the minimum, a universal non-contributory social pension system that can provide for an adequate standard of living, especially for those in poverty threshold, should be ensured. The introduction of carer credits into a pension or superannuation system can be a method of explicitly recognizing those performing unpaid care and domestic work. Fourth, ensure that social protection programs include employment guarantee programs as participatory, gender sensitive, and accessible to women with care responsibilities. The next suggestion is around financing of gender transformative social protection measures. Design progressive taxation policies that can redistribute wealth into social protection programs for the poor and the vulnerable. And second, enhancing domestic resource mobilization to support social protection programs by expanding the tax base, enforcing tax compliance, improving tax administration, and supporting international tax cooperation. Next is enabling appropriate and effective social protection policies. First, design in
Sorry about that, folks. Slight technical glitch there. I think Dr. Diya Dutta is facing a slight technical connection issue. We'll try to bring her back in. We're almost there towards the last bit of her presentation, and we're jumping into a quick Q&A with a few panelists as well. Let's just, we'll bring on, we'll bring on our panelists, and we'll also try our best to bring Dr. Diya back. So we've got Claire Coffey, as well as Mr. Schubert Sincere. So Miss Claire is the Fiscal Justice Advisor from Oxfam, and Mr. Schubert is the ASEAN Engagement Coordinator, Gracia, Oxfam. So we have them both with us. Hi, Claire, and hi, Schubert. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll do our best to see if Dr. Diya can join us.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
Oh, we have you back. That's great. That's great. All right. No worries, Dr. Diya. Maybe you just want to wrap up your last point?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right. We'll just, sorry about that, panelists. Thank you so much, Claire and Schubert. Just bear with us. And we'll just let Dr. Diya just wrap it up before we jump into the Q&As. All right. We're just bringing Dr. Diya back right on now just to quickly wrap up her presentation.
Yeah, so can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can, Doctor.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I was talking about how we can enable appropriate and effective social protection policies. So first is to design inclusive and mandatory social insurance programs with affordable contributions that can be supported by a government finance solidarity subsidy. These social insurance programs should contribute to creating a more level playing field for women within labor markets and include proactive social provisions. Next is design unconditional and adequate cash transfer schemes for women that can promote gender equality, and then ensure social assistance is linked with child and healthcare and job skills to facilitate access to employment. Another area where social protections can be made gender transformative is by addressing unpaid care and domestic work directly. So first is recognize unpaid care and domestic work by monetizing it and instituting a reward system for women's care work contributions. Reduce the drudgery associated with care work with access to social protection benefits, redistribute care work from women to men and from families to state, and represent caregiver in decision-making processes. Next, recognize and value unpaid care work by ensuring carers' rights, including their right to social security and an adequate standard of living. Next, establishing a system of robust database on unpaid care and domestic work among ASEAN member states that can inform the design of effective gender transformative social protection policies and address the redistribution of unpaid care and domestic work responsibility. Develop appropriate social protection schemes for carers, such as non-contributory public pension schemes, and assured access to universal public healthcare services and unconditional cash transfer programs, and ensure provisions for equivalent paid parental leave. It also is important to ensure that right for a formal contract and social benefits for paid care providers and domestic workers. And finally, in the context of the ongoing COVID pandemic, it is important to take into account such major disruptions to care work as well as government responses to such major health crisis situations. Ensure long-term sustainable gender transformative social protection policies that can enhance the resilience of vulnerable communities and individuals, especially poor women and girls. Ensure that women who lost their jobs or incomes have equal access to the labor market when the economy recovers. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Diya. Just stay online and we have our esteemed panelists join us. Thank you so much. Now, we already have some exciting questions that have come in. I'm going to go right into it in lieu of time. So, Dr. Diya, what do the numbers represent in slide 6 of your presentation?
Can we, I've lost my, I've lost the connection with the presentation. Can we pull up the
No worries.
slide 6? Yeah,
This is it. Yep.
yeah, great. Can you just repeat the question, please?
So what do the numbers represent in these slides, in this slide?
Yeah, so as I mentioned that, I mean, what this shows is that there is some degree of social protection available in among countries in the ASEAN region, but overall it is still very modest in size and extent of reach. Mostly it doesn't cover the informal economy, and that's the major concern because a majority, about 70 to 80% of the population is working in the informal economy. They are not being covered. Secondly, uh, there is absolutely no social protection policy which is addressing unpaid care and domestic work. And we already have established that unpaid care and domestic work is second highest in the Southeast Asian as well as larger Asian region in the whole world. So it is imperative that we come up with social protection policies which address these concerns. So this snapshot is just to kind of show that it's a modest start. It's laudable that there is a start, but it's still modest, and a lot can be done to improve and address unpaid care and domestic work.
Thank you so much for that clarification, Doctor. I think that was helpful for us to understand a little better. One more question for you before we have one for Schubert. So this morning we heard some examples of social protection schemes for women. Now, since we're now talking about unpaid care and domestic work, can you think of specific examples of promising social protection schemes that address UCDW in Asia Pacific specifically?
Overall, there is actually no social protection scheme which addresses UCDW, but in Indonesia, there is a men care program which is worth mentioning because it allows country partners to conduct group education sessions with youth, couples, and fathers on sexual and reproductive health and rights, maternal, newborn, and child health, gender equality, and caregiving. Now, why I mention this is because, in some senses, this is also gender transformative because it addresses issues of social norms, gender division of labor between the caregiver woman and the breadwinner man. It addresses fundamental root causes of gender inequality in society. So this is actually a laudable program that Indonesia has started.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, I'm going to gently remind even myself and our panelists and all upcoming speakers and presenters, we need to slow it down because our translators are doing their best to keep up with us. I mean, for those of us where English is our first language, we don't think about this, and I am guilty of this as well. So, panelists, bear with me here. We're going to have to slow it down a little bit in our answers and as we keep up with the forum. Okay, so my next question is for Schubert. How can the ASEAN Declaration on Strengthening Social Protection incorporate a gender lens?
Thank you for that question. And if I may apologize in advance for the background noise because I'm sitting just after a very busy street. We are working from home because our office is currently close to the pandemic. Well, one good thing about the ASEAN is that we already have an existing regional framework. In my view, what needs to be done is to incorporate a gender lens into this framework so that it is able to also address the particular needs of women, particularly those who are in the informal labor sector. And there is a big number of that as indicated by our presenter. And also to be able to address the gaps in recognizing unpaid care and domestic work in the region, which is borne mostly by women and girls. And I think the way to do this is to engage at the capital where political decisions are made and work with the government in bringing that up to the ASEAN government and other stakeholders like ASEAN bodies like the ASEAN Committee on Women, the ASEAN Committee on Women and Children, and also with the mechanism that is currently facilitating a gender mainstreaming process cuts across the three pillars of the ASEAN. Once the member states take this up and presents this to the ASEAN, then perhaps there will be a need to review and identify the gaps of the framework, particularly gaps that pertain to social benefits for informal women workers and gaps that are not able to cover or address concerns about unpaid care and development work in the region. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Schubert. The next question we have is for Claire. How can ASEAN countries provide the appropriate fiscal space for gender transformative social protection?
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I think we have an expert panel discussing fiscal space on a separate session. Certainly the report that was beautifully presented refers to some areas for increasing fiscal space. What is fiscal space? Well, it's essentially creating sufficient funds in order to invest the level that we need to do social protection in a way that addresses unpaid care and domestic work. So in terms of kind of broad brush fiscal space options, we can increase tax revenues clearly. That could be from, as the report, as the presentation referred to, that can be by introducing, increasing revenues, but ensuring that those are fair and based on progressive taxation, so that those who are better placed to pay taxes do pay their fair share. And we have to note that a lot of taxation nowadays is coming from everyone through consumption taxes. So this idea that actually social protection currently is funded only by the wealthier taxes is not true. Everyone is paying into revenues. So fair and progressive taxation is one option. Another is, within that same parcel, is to reduce the loss of tax revenues through tax giveaways, through bilateral tax agreements. Countries lose a huge amount, as we know, and that money properly captured could be spent in this area. I wanted to add one third one, however, and that is, in the existing envelope, in the existing resources that countries have, decisions are made about where to spend taxes, about where to put the revenues. And I think we often kind of avoid that question of, you know, if we believe that that social safety net, that social protection is a right, that everyone, not dependent on where they work and how they work, but that everyone has a right to it, then we also have to see, well, maybe there are some areas of budget spend that need to be reduced. So I think we often say, well, let's raise more money to put into social protection. Often that is needed. But let's also look at other areas where we are spending that maybe we need to reduce and reprioritize. Ultimately, this is a question of prioritization.
Thanks a lot, Claire. Appreciate you weighing in on that. Next question goes back to Dr. Diya. In the morning, we also touched upon the fact that social protection doesn't operate independently and that there is a need for consistency with other policies. Can you please explain the intersection between family care policies and social protection and their role in addressing unpaid care and domestic work? Doctor, you're muted. Can you just unmute yourself, Doctor?
Sorry about that. It's a very pertinent question. And I mean, by family care, we mean, mostly we mean equal paid parental leave and parental benefits provided. And it's very important because, you know, Provisions for maternity leave and breastfeeding provisions are in place in a lot of formal economy spaces in Southeast Asia. But these policies and measures essentially reinforce the traditional patriarchal gender norms or the caregiver woman and breadwinner man roles of men and women in society. What equal parental leave policies should be considered is because ideal standard for recognizing gender equal rights and responsibility to care for their children. Equal paid and non-transferable parental leave is important for gender redistribution of care work, ensuring that leave policies to care for children equally support both genders to be the caregivers. The more equal and generous such parental leave policies are, the more they promote redistribution between genders. Parental leave that incentivizes and supports men to have an equal caregiving role is also important for supporting women to have greater access to secure full-time employment and to reduce the gender pay gap. Currently, such schemes are relegated to the formal sector, as I mentioned, which is a big hindrance for countries in Southeast Asia, as close to 90% of the workforce is in the informal sector in many countries. Parental leave should be made actually universal, covering men and women in both formal and informal contracts and is irrespective of sexual orientation, biological versus adoptive parents. To ensure uptake, it needs to be for an adequate time period and well paid and non-transferable. Thank you.
To link unpaid care and social protection. And okay, yeah, that's right. Why is it important to link unpaid care and social protection? What is the link with the 4Rs? I think Dr. Diya had to answer the door there. Sorry about that, folks. You know, the beauty of our live events as we bring people from far and wide. Oh, maybe Claire, you want to wait? Oh, hold on.
Sorry, could you please repeat the question? I lost your volume for some time.
No problem. Could you go into more details on why it is important to link unpaid care and social protection? What are the links with the 4Rs?
So what the 4Rs actually does is that it does the most critical thing of recognizing the work that women and girls do in terms of unpaid labor. And that's the first and most important step towards kind of addressing unpaid care and domestic work responsibilities in the Southeast Asian context. And then the question is about reducing and redistributing. So the moment you redistribute between individuals, that is men and women, between the community and the state, you already start reducing the burden that women face in playing the part of undertaking unpaid care and domestic work, and therefore reduce some of the drudgery that they are subjected to, and after that they can take part in paid work in a more effective and competitive manner. And finally is also representation, because these people are some of the most poor and marginalized in society, and they have no access to voice their opinions or their concerns or their demands to society and the state. And it's very important to find avenues through which they can represent their voices and mention what their concerns are and what could be done. This would make it very inclusive and participatory, whereby it can actually make sure that their voices are heard.
Thank you, Doctor. Claire, we have a question for you. How do we ensure UCDW is taken on board?
Thank you. Yeah, so I suppose this links very much with the last question. I think one question is just to kind of come back to one of the R's, which is about recognition. A key issue is clearly, for many reasons, including lack of voice and representation of carers in the discussion, including the lack of carers in people deciding on social protection policies, that we're just not seeing where care exists, how much time is spent on it. We're not giving it a sort of similar weighting that we give to other work. And so I think Oxfam produced a figure last year in the report we drafted for the Davos gathering, which came to a figure of, if you put a kind of minimum wage value to unpaid care and domestic work, you would come up with a figure of $10.8 trillion contribution to the global economy. So this is really important in terms of this issue of kind of giving sufficient weight and really being able to see what it is we are talking about and the importance of that work. This is not a burden, but this is a really important part of society and of economy that we need to invest in. And that at the moment is rather invisible, and that is being carried by certain groups of people, and it is affecting therefore also how they're able to engage in work and how they're able to access social protections. So that was one thing I wanted to add on the R, on the recognize. But the other point, absolutely, I wanted to come in also on the fourth R, the representation. We must recognize that the economy, that the way work is described, what is valued as work, but also the representatives of workers and the unions, the voice of workers who are involved in negotiating social protection. These are often very much mirroring the kind of, the power in societies. And therefore, if we particularly look at work and workers' unions, they tend to involve, formal workers. Those are formal worker organizations are representing workers. They are negotiating social protection packages. If we want social protection to cover and do what they need to do for informal workers and for unpaid workers, then we have to fundamentally change who is involved in the conversation, how different groups, carers, unpaid carers, informal workers, how they are represented within formal kind of tripartite negotiation. So this is a big shift, but without that representation, it's going to be almost always an afterthought, and we really won't transform the system, most probably. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And, a big word out to our panelists. If you want to add on to anything here to this discussion, please don't hesitate. We do welcome you weighing in at any time. I do have Schubert, I have a question for you, but if you want to say something first, go ahead. Would you like to hear the question first, sir?
Yes, please.
Awesome. What is the role of civil society in working with ASEAN in promoting a more gender transformative agenda for social protection?
In my view, gender equality has always been among the core priorities of civil society organizations in the region. And that is one thing that we need to put forward in the consideration of regional policy frameworks in the ASEAN, particularly on social protection and addressing unpaid care and development work. And based on our experience, the ASEAN has provided spaces to accommodate the voices of civil society organizations and consider their proposals or policy recommendations for both social protection and addressing unpaid care and development. Last December, we were invited to brief or share our recommendations for addressing unpaid care and development domestic work in the region by the ASEAN Committee on Women as part of their process in developing their 5-year work plan. And we are looking forward to opportunities such as that. And for this particular forum, we actually prepared a paper on that contains recommendations on social protection that empowers women, and also at the same time addresses unpaid care and development work, which we hope we will be able to share with you at the soonest possible time. Perhaps the organizers will be able to share the links to both papers for to all the participants, so that they can take a look at it and reflect on the recommendations, and perhaps also invite you to join us in this process of putting forward a gender lens in ASEAN's regional policy frameworks. Thank you.
Thanks, Schubert. And I think you wanted to say something else, or did you already cover it in this
Yeah,
answer?
I already covered it in my response.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Now, we're about to wrap things up. I want to actually put this out to the panelists. If any of you want to weigh in with anything else, you want to add on some points, any final words, the floor is yours to each one of you. We definitely want to hear from you as subject matter experts. So please feel free, any one of you, to just step up and just say what you need to say and just add on some words of wisdom. Dr. Diya, would you like to just say anything else in a wrap-up?
No, thanks. I think Claire and Schubert have added a lot of very valuable points to my presentation. The critical thing is to understand that social protection policies don't operate in a space of vacuum. There are pre-existing social norms, gender inequalities, patriarchal systems, all of which are at work, which kind of affects how social protections should be designed and how women and girls who are extremely marginalized in most societies can access these social protection needs. Because if you're already very disempowered, then just by simply providing a policy or a scheme or a measure may not actually help them, because you have to create an enabling environment for them to be able to access and receive the benefits of those measures for their benefit. So it's very important to understand that all of this has to be taken into account when you create social protection policies, and kind of address the inherent inequalities in society which prevent women from participating equally as equal citizens in the society and the state. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Doctor. Claire, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think one point, I suppose, is that although examples are too few and too far between, there are examples. If we look across the globe, there are good practices, there are pilots. So there is, for someone looking for inspiration, there is plenty there. And so I would encourage policymakers and civil society organizations, to get in touch, but to look around. There's increasing documentation also from UN Women, from ILO, from international organizations. So there are examples there that are really important for us to amplify, to extend. I think one point that is insurmountable is the connection or the relevance of informal workers. And this has been stressed, but I think it has to be stressed again. We find often that the best practices, they are restricted not only to formal workers, but often public sector workers. And we have to congratulate that and for that pioneering, but we have to recognize that up to 80–90% of women are working in informal sectors. And those sectors are also quite racialized. Different groups, different castes will be occupying different roles. We have to really be mindful that a formal work-related policy is really good, but it is not going to address the unpaid care and domestic work that informal workers are are holding, and that is often the reason for them being in more precarious work because they have to do work around their care work. So informal and unpaid are very closely related, and that's the challenge to governments is you've got to extend coverage to everyone. You've got to extend coverage to people who are not registered, to sectors that are unregistered, to migrant populations. This is not a niche subject for people in privileged formal work. It is a subject for everyone engaged in care. And as has been said, carers are not a biological sex. So we need to really make sure that social protection policies are rewarding and redistributing and reducing where appropriate care work, no matter who is doing it. And in that process, we may be encouraging a sharing across genders in doing this work. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Claire. Schubert, would you like to say a few more things? Awesome.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think one important consideration that we have to take into account is the impact of COVID-19, which has increased the care responsibilities of women and girls who are already expected to be taking on this role. Aside from their usual domestic responsibilities, they have to take over taking care of sick members of the families and also attending to the home-based learning of their children or any children in the family. The second one is COVID-19 exposed the vulnerability of informal workers who have no social benefits at all or are not covered by any social protection scheme. Most of them lost their jobs because of the economic downturn, and those who lost their job just have no any fallback option to rely on because they don't have any social benefits in the first place. And this is something that we are currently flagging to the ASEAN to be considered and also reflected in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, so that to ensure that no one is left behind, especially those who are borning a big responsibility of care work and those who are in the most vulnerable situation, like informal workers, particularly women in the countryside. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Schubert. Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we do want to thank our esteemed panelists and our speaker, Dr. Diya, Mr. Schubert, and Ms. Claire. We thank you for your time. We thank you for just weighing in on the questions, and please enjoy the rest of the forum with us. Thank you so much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as we move on with the program, in 2020, Oxfam has brought to the forefront women's extensive provision of unpaid care and domestic work and drawn attention to how unpaid care and domestic work greatly impacts women's economic empowerment and gender equality. Next, we have two Oxfam videos to share, one from the Philippines and one from Laos on this subject. Please enjoy.
Tikang hanaisto kan akong asawa. Ako na ang naging nanay, naging tatay han akong pamilya. Nga tanan ha trabahoon ha balay, pati ang pagpakabuhi akon nga tanan. Simple lat akon hingyap, makatapos lat akon mga anak pag-eskwela.
บ่ไอ้เอาเป็นข้าวนอกบ้านไอ้ไม่ได้กับพนักงานของกัน
เอาอ่ะฉันน้องขอไปนำได้บ่
สิไปเฮ็ดหยังมันเป็นเมียของผู้ชายบ่เมียของผู้หญิง
ขอน้องไปนำดู เพราะว่าน้องก็อยากรู้จักหมู่อาย อีกอย่างน้องอยู่แต่บ้านน่ะบ่ได้เปิดหูเปิดตา เฮ็ดแต่อยู่ครัวกิน เอาลูกเอาเต้า น้องก็อยากไปรู้จักหมู่อายเด้
สิไปเฮ็ดหยังอ้ายบอกก็ได้อ้ายนัดกับหมู่พนักงานเดียวกันในโครงการเดียวกันน้องเป็นผู้หญิงผู้หญิงน้องเป็นแม่บ้านน้องต้องเบิ่งลูกเบิ่งเต้านึ่งข้าวเป่าไฟล้างห้วยล้างบวงเท่านี้แหละตามอ้ายบอกนั่นแหละมันสิบ่ทันหมู่เนี่ยนัดกับหมู่แล้ว
เอ้าจานท่องดีอยู่ใจ
โอ้ยเพิ่นไปแต่งอยู่ครัวกินซอยเมียพุ่นนะเฮือนครัวพุ่นน่ะ
ฮะ
มาแล้ว
แข่งกิน
มา
กันอีก
แล้ว
โอ้มาเด้มาอาจารย์ได้สบายดี
มาให้จังเด้โอ้
คักแท้คักแท้
หัวพักตะมะฮง
รับ
ปี
ปาก
ก
มัน
ไก่จะบ่นั่งต้องบ่
แต่แล้วจากสบายทั้งหมดอันเขาจะอย่างเพิ่มอีกบอก
บ่ถ้าหากมีหยังก็ต้องการเพิ่มเขาสิไปเอาเองก็ได้
ซึ่งบัดแล้วเนี่ยคอยเดินสีมาเมียน
เมียนข่อยก็สิเมียนเองก็ได้จะมีแต่เจ้าพักผ่อนเลยก็ได้เขาสิรับแขกข่อย
เส้นตะสบายเด้อทุกคนเด้อ
เจ้า
จบก่อน
ใจหลายเด้อจานต้องดีคอยเห็นเจ้าไปโยกพระเข้าซอยเมียมาแต่งข้างครัว เจ้าบอกพวกเขาว่าคันเบิดแล้วเจ้าสิหามาเพิ่ม เจ้าก็เป็นระดับอาจารย์ เงินดำคำเดือนเจ้าก็สูงหน้าที่การงานเจ้าก็สูงเรียกเงินเรียกซานน่ะเพราะนี้น่ะ เจ้าก็ซอยลูกซอยเมียเฮ็ดอยู่พอกินอยู่งานซานมันก็โพดโพดบนย่านเมียว่ะ
นั่นแหละเวียกเฮือนเวียกซานเวียกบ้านกันเฮือนก็ปล่อยให้เมียเฮ็ดบ่แม่นหน้าที่เฮาเจ้าก็ย่านเมียพูด
เขาบ่ได้เอิ้นญาติเมียเขาเอิ้นให้เกียรติเมีย
โนอาจารย์ต้องดีในครอบครัวเนาะเขาก็เป็นผู้นำเนาะเป็นหัวหน้าครอบครัวแค่นำหน้าที่เวียกงานแต่เวียกงานเพียงอยู่เขากินมาจิกมาจอกมาล็อกมาแลกกันนะเขาก็ปล่อยผู้หญิงเขาซะปล่อยแม่บ้านเฮ็ดซะจัด
เฮานี่น่ะเฮ็ดเวียกเบิดมือเบิดเว้นหาเงินน่ะแต่เช้าจนค่ำก็เมื่อยแล้วยังสิมาวนนำพาข้าวพาน้ำอยู่สิแม่นแนว
เจ้าฟังเด้อข่อยถามอยู่ดู ถ้าหากว่าบ่มีแม่เฮือนเฮาจะหาเงินได้สะดวกบ่เฮาต้องห่วงหน้าเพราะวงหลัง แม่นเฮาเฮ็ดเวียกหาเงิน แต่อย่าลืมนะเฮายังมีเวลาพักตอนเที่ยงเฮายังมีเวลาเลิกตอน 4:00 นไปเล่นกีฬาไปออกกำลังกายไปกินเลี้ยงซุ่มแซวกับหมู่กับคู่แต่เมียเฮ็ดหยังตื่นสามารถ5:00 นเขาลุกมาหุงข้าวแล้วแต่งผ้าขาวเช้าแล้วรีดเครื่องแล้วเอาลูกไปส่งโรงเรียนแล้วกลับมาล้างถ้วยแล้วซักเครื่องแล้วรีดเครื่องปัดเพื่อนฮดดอกไม้แล้วไปหาบลูกแล้วยังต้องไปมู่บุญไปเฮ็ดเวียกแทนเฮาหลายสิ่งหลายอย่างถ้าจะไล่เป็นเงินแล้วเงินเดือนของเขาเจ้าหลายล้านอยู่ไดต่อเดือนฉะนั้นการที่ผัวไปเฮ็ดเวียกหาเงินได้เหตุผลหลักๆย้อนมีเมียเฮ็ดเวียกเฮือนอยู่ทางหลังเฮ็ดให้เฮาบ่ต้องห่วงหน้าเพราะวงหลังเข้าใจบ่
โดย
เข้าใจอาจารย์คักหลาย
อุ๊ยอ้ายเฮ็ดอีหยังตัวเจ้านี่ฮะ
ตากเครื่อง
โอ้ยเห็นน้องตากก็ได้บ่เคยเห็นอ้ายตากจักเทื่อ
น้องผ่านมาไอ้ขอโทษเด้อไอ้ฮู้ว่าน้องต้องเมื่อยน้องต้องเฮ็ดเวียกหนักกับครอบครัวน้องต้องรับภาระเลี้ยงลูกไปส่งลูกนึ่งข้าวเป่าไฟต่อไปอ้ายจะเป็นคนแบ่งเบาภาระกับครอบครัวช่วยน้องเอง
แท้บ่อ้าย
โดย
หน้าทางเอ้ย
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that. It was just a reinforcement of all that we're discussing in this forum. So thanks to the Filipino team and the Laotian team for that video. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to session B's case study. Next up, we present Argentina's initiative on unpaid care and domestic work by Ms. Florencia Caro Sachetti. Now, Ms. Sachetti is the coordinator for the Social Protection Program at the Center for the Implementation of Public Policies Promoting Equity and Growth based in Argentina. She is also involved in the T20 and W20 networks, delivering policy recommendations to G20 leaders. With broad experience in policy research, practice, and advocacy, her work focuses on promoting gender equality and social inclusion through the implementation of evidence-based policies that are people-centered. Florencia holds a Master's in Science and Development Studies from the UK and a Bachelor in Science of Economics from Argentina. She is a member of Global Shapers. Among other distinctions, she was selected as the Young Global Changer by the Global Solutions Initiative. Do enjoy this case study.
So hello everybody, my name is Florencia Caro Sachetti. I'm the coordinator of the Social Protection Program at CIPPEC. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about social protection and unpaid care and domestic work during the pandemic in Argentina. First of all, just to introduce CIPPEC, we are a non-profit independent think tank that we work to produce evidence-based recommendations to policymakers to design better public policies related to social development, economic development, and government and state issues. So our mission is to propose policies pursuing development, equity, and the strengthening of democracy. Turning to the topic of our conversation, maybe a starting point is to see what was before the pandemic, the situation of women in the Argentine labor market. So we know that as it happened in the rest of the world, female labor force participation started to increase starting in the 1970s, and then it rose until the dawn of the 2000s, when we know there was a stagnation where female labor force participation remained 20 percentage points below men's labor participation. This means that not only women had trouble entering the labor market, but also once they enter and participated, either having or looking for a job, we know that women are more prone to be unemployed, sub-employed, or work in the informal sector. On the flip side of the coin, we know that women have a greater participation in unpaid care and domestic work. So on average, the latest data that we have from 2013, we know that 9 every 10 women do this kind of course compared to only 6 out of 10 men. And we know that this share of women that do care work increase when they have children, but that is not that much the case related to men. At the same time, when we see the daily hours they devote to care work, we see that women do almost twice as many hours, and this increases greatly when they have 1 or either 2 children. At the same time, we know that this shares both of participation in care work and of daily hours devoted to care work do not vary for men, either whether they are employed or unemployed, as in all cases, they do more or less the same work. Instead, in the case of women, it does decrease a little bit when they are employed, but still the gap exists between men and women. When we think about the consequences of the pandemic, we know that they are englobed in 2 fields, basically, when we look at the socioeconomic dimensions. On the one hand, in the labor market, the impacts of the pandemic have felt way heavier on women. And on the other hand, related to the domestic sphere, the pandemic increased women's time poverty, and this was especially heavy for the most deprived. If we dig into the details of what happened both in the domestic sphere and the labor market, we see that labor force participation in the worst moment of the pandemic, that was March 2020, it decreased for all populations, but still we see that if we compare to the last quarter of last year, it increased for all of the groups except for women who are head of households and who have a partner. So in this case, it might suggest that there might be a relation with the division of the sexual division of labor and how this intensified during the pandemic. In a similar vein, we see that many households who had at least 1 member with work problems since the pandemic, most of them were households with children. And when we see that those households who didn't have a job during the pandemic, the higher share who lost this job during the pandemic was also households with children. When we compare women to men as heads of households, we see that women lost their jobs with a difference of 5 percentage points during this period. Turning to the impacts that this had on well-being, we see that, again, it is women-headed households who bear the brunt of the pandemic. So we see that poverty increased for all groups, but still it is almost threefold in increase compared to households with no children. So what we know is that at the last quarter of the pandemic, 6 every 10 households headed by women who live also with children. This means that they have a heavier burden of care responsibilities while living in poverty. At the same time, households needed to implement different strategies to cope with these reductions in income and to these situations related to poverty during the pandemic. Again, we see that it is households with children who had more trouble paying for basic services and utilities, who had to use their own savings to cover for these needs, who reduced both the consumption of food and non-food products, and who access social protection programs to cope with these needs both before and during the pandemic. So all this shows how the households who have children, and in this case, they have higher needs related to care and who may face bigger tensions regarding income generation and caring, are the ones who are bearing the brunt of the pandemic. Of course, as we know that care is feminized, this has clear implications for gender equality. When we turn specifically to unpaid care and domestic work, we know that 6 out of 10 households found difficulties in balancing care and paid work during lockdown measures. We know that, again, it is households with children who increase both the time devoted to caring for other household members and who increase the share of domestic work that they had to do. The distribution within households also shows an intensification of this feminization of care. As when we look at households who had at least 2 members who could take on these tasks, it is almost in 70% of households that only or mostly women took this burden. Instead, in only 20% of the families, it was women who did this, or even in less houses, there was an equitable gender distribution between men and women. Overall, how we can summarize these impacts, we know that there were huge socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic crisis. We know that Argentina was one of the most affected countries in Latin America, as GDP dropped almost 10 percentage points last year, while poverty increased 7.5. We already had a high floor of structural poverty, as 35% of people were living under the poverty line, but now this share of population has increased to 42%. At the same time, some estimations by the Ministry of Economics show that before the pandemic crisis, unpaid care and domestic work represented around 16% of the total GDP of Argentina. During the pandemic, we know that in some way, the crisis unveiled the relevance of care work, and we also know how the measures to avoid the sanitary collapse, such as lockdown measures, imply the familiarization of all spheres of life. This means that unpaid care and domestic work started to represent 22% of GDP during the pandemic. At the same time, in the case of Argentina, both schools and early childhood and education services were closed through most of 2020 and most of this year also. They have just recently reopened. So we know that the lack of in-person education implied effects on children learning outcomes, but also it was an obstacle to a female labor force participation, as there are increases in care demand. Due to these effects, we know that women's economic autonomy was disproportionately impacted, as there was a higher increase in poverty, stronger decline in female labor force participation, and they were overburdened by this increase in unpaid work. We know that these effects were even greater for lower income women who have maybe less resources or less access to other networks who can contribute to redistribute this burden of unpaid work, and also with female-headed households with children who need to both generate income, but also to address these care responsibilities. This means that, again, in March, April, and May of last year, more than 1.5 million women exited the labor market, not only by becoming unemployed, but also to moving to inactivity and not even looking for a job. Given this context, Argentina's COVID-19 policy response did include many policies from a gender lens. We know that according to UN Women and UNDP, who implemented a global gender response tracker, over 60% of COVID-19 response policies in our country were gender sensitive. This is one of the highest shares in the world. This can be englobed in three topics, which are unpaid care and domestic work, economic security, and gender-based violence. We know that there were also measures relating to support to entrepreneurs and the private sector. This did not necessarily have a gender perspective. Regarding unpaid care and domestic work, the government provided support to long-term care services for the elderly, for people with disabilities, and for early childhood and education centers. At the same time, community assistance and guidance was provided to vulnerable populations, and also workers who had dependents were able to take paid leaves. Nonetheless, while this happened, we also know that both school and early childhood and education centers were mostly closed. Regarding economic security, the government provided income support through increasing family allowances and creating a new allowance, emergency allowance for families. They also granted paid leave for domestic workers during most of 2020. And risky patients, such as pregnant women, were able also to take paid leave. The government also provided food assistance and created a social productive inclusion program who supported deprived populations. Regarding what is gender-based violence, the government strengthened hotlines to help women to make denouncers, extended both protection measures and also territorial measures that allowed women to access secure spaces and escape situations of violence. They also improved protocols during lockdown and provided new shelters in alliance with different territorial organizations. From all this, we know that care work was a policy priority, is still a policy priority for the government. There's a new area within the Women, Gender and Diversity Ministry that coordinates a committee with other ministries to work on a comprehensive care system projects, and there are also national campaigns. And at the same time, we see that economic support and social protection measures were crucial to mitigate the socioeconomic negative impacts of the crisis. Last year, CIPPEC made some estimations, and we estimate that these social protection policies, such as the increase in family allowances and the creation of this new income support measure, might have prevented more than 1 million people falling into poverty. Nonetheless, at the same time, we face several challenges. Regarding gender equality, we know there's a strong sexual division of labor, that even if we provided all these measures related to care and domestic work, still we see that it is women who bear the brunt by retiring from the labor market and strengthening their role in care work. And at the same time, from a more macroeconomic perspective, Argentina has a long-term crisis with reduced growth for many years before the pandemic started. So this means we have strong budget restrictions that prevent from implemented more income support measures. We also have a high level of structural poverty in the country. As I said, before the pandemic, we already had 35% of people living under poverty. There are also some issues related to macroeconomic instability. And at the same time, Argentina is a federal country, so things related to education, as is the early childhood and education centers, to care policies, or to health, for example, depend on the provinces. As every province had a different sanitary situation, there was some lack of coordination that prevented from more stronger and integrated policies to respond to these challenges. When we try to think, what can we do to strengthen actions towards a more caring society? On the one hand, we see that social protection floors are essential to guarantee an adequate standard of living for all, as we cannot think about recovering from the pandemic by leaving half of the population behind. This means that if women are retired from the labor market and they start working only as caregivers in their families, we have to think, how can we implement this right-based approach to guarantee this minimum standard of living for all? By implementing these social protection floors, we can ensure a more equitable and sustainable development and also more inclusive and resilient societies. These social protection floors need to be intertwined with the creation of comprehensive and federal care systems that address the needs of families, because we know that during the pandemic, governments were very focused on avoiding the sanitary collapse, but the focus was not also in avoiding families' collapse. So we know that it was families who had to bear this brunt and to reorganize themselves with the resources that they had, and responding to care responsibilities implied depending on the socioeconomic situation and the resources that families had by themselves. So these care systems that we need to rethink, and we can think about a care-led recovery. As we said, that the pandemic unveiled the relevance of care for sustaining life as we know it. This means we need to recognize the value of unpaid care and domestic work. We need to reduce the burden of this care that falls on families to avoid this dependency on the resources that families have, to redistribute care between not only men and women, but also between families, the state, the market, and the community, to guarantee the representation for domestic workers and caregivers, and to reward adequately these paid workers. This means that a care system needs also be based on three basic pillars. This is providing time to care with parental leave regimes that are universal, that foster shared responsibility, and that are also flexible for families to organize themselves. We also need to provide cash transfers for families to have the resources to respond to these needs. In Argentina, we do have this system of cash transfers, but it's not universal. We still have many families with children who do not reach them. And as I said before, we have these budget restrictions regarding these programs. And also we have to provide services for families, even when the sanitary situation requires the closure of schools, of early childhood centers. We need to provide solutions for these families that still need these services to respond to their care needs. This becomes relevant from three perspectives to address both unpaid care and domestic work and social protection from a policy perspective. First, this is a basic human right for all, the right to care and to be cared for. So we cannot think about inclusive and sustainable development if we are leaving half of the population behind regarding women, but also regarding their families and the people who need this care that is generally provided by women. So the redistribution of care and domestic work and the provision of the social protection floors to help families respond to these needs is, first of all, a matter of rights. On the second hand, we know that this also can foster not only equity, but also inclusive and sustainable development, as these kind of policies are a win-win solution to many of the problems and challenges that our economy faces. And on the third hand, we also know that Argentina is still on the window of demographic opportunities. So taking advantage of the demographic dividend means also providing policies of care and social protection to allow a better labor insertion of the population and also improving standards of living for all. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Florencia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, due to the time zone differences, we don't have time for Q&As with her, but we do trust that you got something out of that. Now, not to worry, everything that has been shared today and that will be shared tomorrow, from the presentations to the slides, are going to be made available. Now, you have all been asking for it multiple times today. We have heard you, and we definitely intended to make sure that we get it into your hands. We want every one of you to be equipped to have it with you so that we collectively can work together to ensure that social protection does truly empower women. Now, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we want you to go to Slido right now and select polls. All right? Now, just go on to Slido on your mobile phones. All right? Go ahead and click this QR code. We encourage everyone to participate. Now, when you click on polls, in one word, what does social protection that empowers women mean to you? Just one word. I want everyone who has joined us in today's forum to go ahead and put in one word that means to you. What is one word that to you encapsulates the definition of social protection that empowers women? I'm going to give you a bit of time because we want all of you to do this. We want collective polls. We want everyone to put that one word in. So go ahead. I want to see 300 words on screen, 250 words on screen. I know we have a lot of you that signed up, a lot of you that joined us. I think we've got about 200 people in today's forum. So I'm expecting to see, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of similar words. Now, the one word that came in the most times is going to be dead center in our word cloud. So let's see, what is that key word that is going to be on the minds of all our forum participants? All right, I'm seeing very few words. There's 200 of you. I want everyone to go into Slido. To my translation team, please make sure my Vietnamese friends, my Cambodian friends, and my Laotian friends, that they go to Slido as well. Feel free to type it in their own language. We'll figure it out. All right? Now, to everyone else, go ahead. Put in your word cloud. Put in your keyword. Right now, there are 3 words that are standing strong: equity, support, and empowerment. All right? There's what we are seeing here: amazing, Oxfam, participation, empower, courage, independence, participation, amazing. I think you guys are putting just how you feel. But what about the one word that is bringing our topic and our title and this whole forum to life? What is it? For now, support seems to be the strongest word of the day. All right, we've got equity in a close second place. Empowerment and equality, justice in 5th place, voice in 6th place. Very good. So these are some of the words that are resonating very strongly with each of you. All right, go ahead, keep sending in your words. All right, we want to know, what was your one takeaway from day one of this forum? We have truly appreciated your time and your presence in joining us for both sessions, Session A and Session B. The fact that you are still with us, it means that this is close to your heart. And from all of us at Oxfam, we are truly empowered that you have taken this time to join us. All right, looks like the strongest word is still support. All right, so the one word that encapsulates social protection and empowers women, we need to band together and support the women in our society. Thank you so much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me draw your attention to tomorrow's schedule. We will start at 1:45 Indochina time. Our agenda will begin with a short networking session. We're going to have a short engagement session. We want to see you guys have a chance to network with each other. Okay, and then we will go into Session C, which is going to be a roundtable discussion covering financing, gender-responsive social problems, social protection and care systems, as well as a case study on the Philippines. All right, now, a gentle reminder, we're going to send you links with all recordings and material just to make it easier for you. We want you to go back and empower your society at large. So, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, it gives me great pleasure to draw day one of our forum to a close. We really hope you've been empowered. We really hope you've been encouraged. Now, before you leave, one last thing you can do. And do that in our chat box. I want my chat box to explode. Please leave your comments, your inputs, your opinions in the chat box about today's session. What did you learn? What did you like? What empowered you? What form of support have you garnered? Just tell us in your own words. Drop it in the chat box. We are going to dive into that after today's forum. We will have a record of it to the team at Oxfam. Your words, your feedback, your responses are going to mean a lot to us. So please tell us exactly what you want to comment, your inputs, your opinions, what you liked, what you learned. Go ahead. Go ahead, tell us, to my friends from the Philippines, to my friends from Vietnam, to my friends from Laos, to my friends from Cambodia. I know there's many more of you from other parts of the region across Asia Pacific, Malaysia, China, Hong Kong, Thailand, Indonesia. I don't know what other countries we have. All right. We truly, truly hope that you have been empowered with our panel of speakers, our presenters, and to the entire program that has run today. And we truly hope you will come back for day 2. All right. So as you leave, just keep typing it in. We'll give you a few more minutes. Very impressive event. Thank you. I mean, that is definitely nice to hear. You know, thank you so much. Very inspiring, useful session. Oh, this is music to our ears. Please keep telling us, because from Oxfam, we want to know that when we put these events together, it truly empowers you. That is our sole intention, to empower you so that you can empower the women in your communities. Social protection that empowers women. This is day 1, June 29, 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an absolute pleasure. My name is Jiggy John, and I will join you again tomorrow with another exciting day 2. So we truly hope you've been blessed today. And take care. Have a good rest of the evening. Have great rest, a great night of rest. And we'll see you tomorrow afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. You can continue dropping your chat. We will keep the stream open. But I'm signing out for now. Over and out. And I'll see you tomorrow. Be blessed.